Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the RollApp Draft Hackathon. It's really great to see you all here. Barry, I know you're very familiar with the process now, so I'm going to invite you to the stage. Please drop your hellos in the chat, everybody. Hey, Barry, how's it going?
Good morning. How are you?
Yes, very, very well. I'll just give you a minute to get yourselves set up. Hello to everyone. I know you're used to seeing Clara. She will be back again next week to take over. So any questions? Oh, and then if you want to ping me, I'll drop all my details in the chat. But otherwise, Clara should be relatively responsive as well if you need to reach her at any point. But yeah, otherwise that's everything from me. If you need anything, do reach out in the chat. If you have any questions, feel free to use the question channel here on Livestorm. But otherwise, Barry, I'd love to hand over to you and yeah, get things kicked off.
Awesome. Sounds good. All right. So in the previous discussions, we talked about the tokens, minting and distributing the tokens, the governance, how people can stake their token, the RollApp token, and actually participate in either the governance and changing parameters or distributing some of the RollApp owned funds called the community pool. And the last thing we talked about was the bridging. So how do actually people get funds allocated or sent to their RollApp, or on the opposite end to withdraw from the RollApp to, for example, Dymension, Ethereum, and other rollups and blockchains. In this talk, we're going to talk about combining all of that information and creating what is called the Genesis file. And a Genesis file is the block zero in your rollup or in your blockchain. It's where you set the balances for who is going to get the airdrop. For example, the team tokens, investors, all of that information. On the Genesis file, you also set the parameters, the initial parameters for the minting. For example, if you want to start at inflation X percent, for example, 5%, and then reduce it incrementally over, say, 2-3 years to 0%, you would set that initially on the Genesis file. Same thing, for example, if you want to distribute tokens to the community pool, the RollApp's community pool, you would set the tax or the percent that would be allocated to the RollApp on the Genesis file. All of that information is presented in a decentralized blockchain that's presented to validators. In a rollup, it's your team is just going to create the Genesis file, deploy it, and instantly you have a node running and you have the RPC, and that's where the blockchain actually begins. So in this tutorial, I'm going to actually go through the process of creating a demo Genesis file, and we'll see how that actually works out. So in the documentation, there's the launch section, and in the launch section, there's a subsection called Genesis, and it gives an overview of initializing the Genesis file. So the Genesis file is different if you're running EVM rollup or a Cosm Wasm rollup, and each individual VM that we add, for example, SVM, Move, and others, will have their own specific parameters that are dedicated to that. But here we use the EVM rollup and we copy it into our terminal. Here I already installed it, but if you haven't, you could just git clone the RollApp EVM template. And the RollApp EVM template it comes with the standard Dymension modules of the RDK. So it comes with governance, distribution, minting, and others. But what it adds is the EVM functionality to deploy smart contracts, and it exposes the proper API endpoints. So to begin, you want to add a key, so a pub key pair to your local key chain. So that will create the correct signing tools so you can actually create the chain, sign transactions, and have funds sent to them. So we'll add a key pair called Shaolin Encode, and that will, we just need to first actually make install the RollApp EVM with the proper Go version. So if you're actually working hand in hand with me, it's 1.22 and above of the Go version.
Sorry, Barry, is there any chance you could slightly enlarge that's perfect. Thank you. That's much easier to see.
Yeah, so I'm working from my computer, from my laptop. So that's probably why it's so small. Generally, if I'd be working from a monitor, it'd probably be bigger. But so here we made it install. So now we could actually see the commands that are relevant for our RollApp EVM. So we can add Genesis accounts. That's how we're going to add accounts to our Genesis file and init, which is important as well. And that's how we initialize the configuration files for our Genesis. So to begin, we're going to add the keys to our keychain so we could actually sign the transactions. So I'll add keychain, and then you add your moniker name. So it'll be Shaolin Encode. And then, blah, 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 what am I missing? Of course, it would be keys add. And here it gives the mnemonic phrase. So it gives the seed phrase. It gives the address. It gives the username. So it would be, this is how you can interact with the CLI with this name, but then it will know and register to this pub key. So all of this information, you can save it to your local, but this is a dummy one. So I'll just use it for this explanation. So here, the next thing we'll do is actually initialize the chain, and we'll use our name that we created. And then what you do is put the chain ID. So for example, on the EVM rollup, it requires a chain ID that is first text. So for example, there is, we'll call it Rolly, and then an underscore, and the chain ID actual number. So generally what happens is on mainnet's chains, you go to chainid.network and you see the available chain IDs. So for example, Ethereum is, for EVM ones specifically, Ethereum is chain ID 1, Dymension is chain ID 1100. So when you're looking on deploying onto mainnet, you want to find one that's available. So we'll use a dummy one that, since we're not actually deploying on mainnet, and then a dash with the version number. The version number is incremented every time you hard fork, but here we'll start with 1. So here it initializes and creates a Genesis file, and we could actually view it in the proper directory. So the proper directory is the roots of your computer, and then config genesis.json. And these are the default configurations, and it may seem like a lot, but we don't really deal with most of it. So we'll actually just continue from here into creating an account. So the first thing that we'll want to do, there's 3 options or 4 options when you're creating a token account. The first option is to allocate tokens without vesting periods. So for example, I can allocate 1,000 tokens with the proper command. So RollApp EVM add Genesis account, and this adds an account to the Genesis file. And then we say, first of all, what is the address? So I need to pull out the address that we just created. So keys show Shaolin encode. And I'm going to add tokens to this address. So add Genesis tokens, RollApp EVM, add Genesis account, and then I put the address and the amount of tokens that I want to give to this account. So it will be this amount of stake tokens. Stake is the default denomination that comes with the Genesis file. So if we look at the Genesis file, we'll see the bond denom stake or the mint denom stake. So when you're actually creating the Genesis file, you want to change all of these denoms to whatever your RollApp is called. And for denoms, it's important to note that the EVM is 18 decimal places. So for example, if your token is DYM, it is used in the CLI and in the JSON file as a DYM. And if you're using CosmWasm or another VM, it's generally 6 decimal places in Cosmos and other, I believe it's 9 decimal places in Solana. And those are different prefixes, but the standard is to use A and the token name. So here we'll go back to creating the RollApp and adding the Genesis account with the address and the stake token. Now, if we look at the Genesis file, we'll see that in the bank, first it creates an account. It creates an account with that address, and it then allocates that address a certain amount of stake tokens. So, and then it increases the total supply of the blockchain. Alternatively, you can allocate tokens through different vesting periods. So, for example, we have the standard one, which I just did. It provides unlock tokens immediately, and this is useful for airdrops, for example. The next one is continuous vesting, which allocates the tokens linearly from a start time to an end time. So, for example, I can provide vesting tokens to someone that begins vesting or unlocks from 1 year from now, and then it unlocks linearly until 3 years from now. So that would be the amount of vesting tokens, the start time, which would be a year from now, and that's in Unix timestamp, and then the end time. A different type of vesting account is the delayed vesting account, and this is just stating the total amount of tokens that will be unlocked at a certain point. So there's no linear or continuous vesting. This is just a cliff. So for example, if you want to do a year from now, 1 million tokens unlock, this is the account that would be used. And the last option is the periodic vesting account. This is pretty much a combination of both, but it's a bit, it's not a linear vest in the same way that the continuous vesting account does, because the continuous vesting account distributes it per block, so it's very incremental. Whereas the periodic vesting account, you set the cliff, which it could be 1 year, for example, but then you set the amount of tokens, the actual amount of tokens that are distributed in subsequent periods. And the way that is structured is that you add the length, which is the amount of time after the previous unlock, and the amount of tokens that will be unlocked. So if you have, for example, monthly unlock, then you would have monthly entries. Or if you have daily unlock, you would probably have too many entries. And if you have daily unlock, you would probably want to use the continuous vesting account. So now that we added the JSON, our account of the JSON file, so that's in the bank module. The bank has our balance. Next, we'll move on to actually setting the fees. Setting the fees is what the user pays in the application, and this is to make sure that the node doesn't get spammed with unnecessary transactions. So if this particular thing is in the app.toml. So if we open the configuration file of the Genesis. So click ls, and then it would be RollApp EVM, and then config. We'll see a few files that are necessary to change, but the only one that's really necessary to change is the genesis.json and one piece in the app.toml, and that piece is the min gas price. So that is the amount of tokens that's required to actually send the transaction to the RollApp. So here we will open the app.toml, and in this, there's a lot of configuration details, but the only one that is interesting to us is the minimum gas prices. So here you would change it to 0.100 or 0.1 stake, and for the denomination that you're using. And that's the only thing that we need to change. So for example, now the sequencer or the RollApp block producer will charge a fee for actually submitting a transaction to the sequencer's mempool. So that's setting up the gas prices. And next we'll want to change the minting parameters. So for example, if we go back to our Genesis file, we'll see the mint, and here by default we have an 8% inflation rate beginning, and then a target inflation rate of 2%. And then every year it's going to decrease by 0.01. So it's going to take 5 years or 4 years or 6 years to get to the target inflation rate. So we can change that by just opening the Genesis file. And changing a parameter, for example, changing the minting to 10% or 0%, and the target inflation to 0%. So now our Genesis file or our rollup has 0 inflation. So if we go back to the mint, it will have 0% inflation starting and 0% inflation ending. So now our tokens that are going to be created by the rollup will only be created on Genesis, for example, through the accounts that we added, and not subsequently through inflation. The next thing is setting the distribution parameters. So for example, since we're not creating inflation, the only tokens that will be distributed to the community pool and to the sequencer and to the stakers are going to be the fees earned, as we said in the previous fees section. So here we can change the community tax and base proposer reward, which is the sequencer, but we won't do so because it's only the fees, and most of the transaction or most of the activity will likely come initially, at least, from the minting rewards rather than the fees, and then eventually, hopefully with enough traction, that your application will earn most of its fees through gas or through other fees rather than through minting rewards. So that is set in the distribution, and we set it initially here as 0% for the sequencer and for the community pool. So in this case, all of the tokens will be allocated to the stakers of your RollApp token rather than a community pool or the sequencer. That's that. The next thing is setting the Genesis bridge account. What this is used for is transferring tokens from the RollApp to Dymension on Genesis or around Genesis. And this is helpful for funding the liquidity pools. For example, if people want to trade the token on the hub or on Dymension, or if people want to trade it on centralized exchanges. What the centralized exchanges do is they use the contract address of the rollup on the community pool, on the Dymension chain, to actually create these centralized exchange swaps for your RollApp token. So the centralized exchange integrates, and they have a guide here, which is called Integrate. And it allows the centralized exchanges to integrate with the proper API endpoints to actually to launch your RollApp token on, for example, Binance or one of those exchanges. So this Genesis bridge, instead of waiting like seven days, for example, or a dispute period for transferring tokens from the RollApp to Dymension, this account is permissioned to transfer it immediately, so people can immediately start trading the tokens on Genesis or upon the launch of the rollup. So here we'll add our account as the account to actually transfer these tokens. So we will again get the account address, and then we will add it to the JSON file, to the Genesis.json file. And it requires it to be an object. And we will put in the address that we got. So now our address is whitelisted to actually transfer those tokens upon Genesis. The next thing that we'll do, or we'll look at, is the governance section. And this is to say, how much time does a community have to deposit tokens or vote on a proposal, and then also the denomination that is required to be set as a deposit. We'll leave these as a default. I think that defaults are generally fine for most rollups, unless you want a very short time of governance or a very extended time of governance. Then you could also always change these. And you could also change the threshold for approving, disapproving, and required how many participants of the total amount of stake tokens are actually in the process of voting in either yes or no on the proposal. So we're going to leave this as a default. And next we'll move on to the staking portion. And this is the amount of governors that we want participating in the protocol. There is a new release for this RollApp EVM that is coming fairly soon, where it's now, instead of going to be called the staking module, it's the governors module. And that's where you'll set the max governors instead of max validators to make it more clear. So here we'll use the default. So for example, if we have 100 max governors, then anyone can enter the set and participate as a governor, and their voting power is based on the amount of delegated RollApp tokens to them. So for example, if one governor has 100% of the voting power or 100% of the delegated tokens relative to the other governors, then the other governors won't have any governance power. It will all be in the hands of that one governor with all of the delegated tokens. We'll leave this as a default as well and move on to the sequencer. The sequencer, this is the operator address. So this one requires the BEC32 validator address, as it's noted here, of the address that we created. So we'll take the address that we created, and then we'll get the operator address of it. So there's an associated operator address, which is different than the regular address. And we'll input that into the Genesis file in the operator section. And that will be that. And then we'll change, for example, the virtual machine settings. So we're talking about the EVM, And if we open up the Genesis file, we'll see that there are certain parameters for the EVM. This in particular enables the creation of new contracts. So this should be set to true. For example, on Dymension, you can't create smart contracts, so it's set to false. Dymension has an EVM only for signing with EVM wallets rather than deploying smart contracts, as all the applications are mostly on the RollApp layer. And then you have enable call, which allows people to actually call and submit post requests to the APIs. Here we set, we'll change these defaults, but no base fee should be set to true, as most of the fees or the fee structure is using the Cosmos logic or underlying Diamonds logic rather than the EVM. So it's not using like EIP 1559. It's using a very simple first in, first out transaction method. So like once a sequencer has a transaction in its mempool and it's valid, they're going to process it rather than doing some gas fluctuations. They're static gas for now. So we'll change these in the Genesis file under the fee market, and we'll set no base fee to true. And then since we're setting no base fee to true, we'll set the base fee to actually 0. And then we should be good to go with the fee markets. And the last thing, well, we can add additional operators or additional governors through the GenTX, but we already have this when we inputted the validator operator in the Genesis bridge, as far as I remember. So this should be able to start. Yeah. So once we have that going, once we created that Genesis file with those parameters, we have a working RollApp EVM. So it's listening on the localhost 8545 port. So that's for the JSON RPC, for the EVM JSON RPC. And we could submit smart contracts to it. And we could submit post and get requests to this API endpoint. So once you have this going, so block created, height 0, height 1, number of transactions is 0. That's when we can actually submit the requirements. And here, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to query. First, I'm going to get my address. So showing the fortunately, I have to install it in this. Just have to install the RollApp EVM on this terminal. It's going to build it in 1 second.
Barry, I'm not sure if you can see the chat over in Livestorm, but someone has shared an error they're getting. So I don't know if that's something you can quickly kind of troubleshoot or if it's going to require some more thought afterwards. But yeah, it's on the questions channel if that helps.
Let me see. So getting error, sh scripts init sh, RollApp EVM does not exist. Please run make install. However, followed all the docs. Well, make sure to make install with the once you git clone the repo, you want to make install the build. So for example, if we go to the initial section, it's git cloning the RollApp EVM, and then you're gonna move into the directory of the RollApp EVM, and then you're gonna make install. This requires Go version 1.22.2 at least, if I remember correctly. So make sure to have that, and that should work in terms of installing. And this is similar to what I just did if you can see on my terminal, I make install the RollApp EVM, and then when I input the RollApp EVM command, I get the actual commands. So what I will do now is I'm going to show my key that I created. So encode key. And what I want to do is, now that I have a running blockchain in this terminal, I want to query my balance that I created, so bank balances. And I want to query this address. And I see as a response, I get the amount of tokens I created on Genesis file and the stake denom. From here, I can do things like deploy smart contracts. And you could use, for example, Remix EVM or Foundry, Hardhat. What else is there? And there's other ones that are used as well. And to deploy the actual smart contracts. But here you can also have a list of transactions. For example, if you want to send tokens from one user to another, you could do a RollApp EVM transaction bank send, and then you would actually put the from address to the address with the amount that you're sending. And this is pretty much how you create a Genesis file. And this is how you also start the blockchain. The one piece that we're not going to go into is actually starting the relayer, which is which allows us to transfer tokens from the RollApp EVM to the Dymension blockchain and others. So I'm going to open the floor for questions to see if someone has another one. So what of the export variables, could that be the issue? If you're running the init script, it could be an issue in the with the export variables as the developers are changing that. But if you're running it as the way I demonstrated in the Genesis documentation, then it should work. So if you run it with these docs and go over like each individual module, then it will eventually work. I'm not sure if is it possible to ask an audio question, but
no, unfortunately it's not. So if there are any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and I'll try and do my best to shout them out to Barry as he's going along. I see Adrian is typing. Maybe we'll give Adrian a couple of seconds. And another question. Okay, they're going to restart the process to see if they can get that working.
Yeah, it could be an issue with Go. So I use GVM as a Go manager, and that's helpful for using the right version in case, like, if you have issues on make install. That's usually helpful to. I use GVM as a Go manager tool.
Awesome. Well, I think that's it for now in the chat on questions. If there are any others, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, Barry, feel free to carry on.
Yeah. So no. So that's pretty much how we launched, build out the Genesis file, and how we actually get the RollApp EVM working. So here I'll just share my screen again, as we have as I'm showing on this page that the RollApp EVM is working. So everything, I could send transactions to it. It's a live blockchain. It just doesn't have a bridge that is connected to it. That is done through IBC relayers, and we're going to include that into the roller, so that's very easy to bootstrap. But from here, once you have these port addresses, you can connect it to and import your private key into a MetaMask and use it in your use it in Remix or Foundry or Hardhat, for example. But that's pretty much it in terms of creating a Genesis file and then deploying the blockchain itself or running a local instance of the blockchain.
Amazing. Thank you very much. And to everyone who's struggling with that or getting errors, obviously, as always, this will be recorded. So feel free to watch it back. You can go through again step by step, and hopefully you can get it working. If not, of course, as well, you're welcome to ask any follow-up questions over in the servers or anywhere else. And we would do our best to get those answered for you. So there's lots of support in place if anyone does need it and is still struggling. So please do just reach out and we'll do our best to get that sorted for you. But otherwise, Barry, are there any kind of final remarks from your end? Any last bits to share?
So there is a question here. If we want to make a Genesis drop to Dime stakers, what is the relation of Dime address with our chain address? So we provide documentation with here, and it's the roll drop template. And I'm going to provide it in the chat. And what it does is it gives you the tools to create the website. So for example, it gives you the tools to create signless airdrops websites that we use, for example, on Dymension, on NIM, and a few others. In terms of relation between Dime staker addresses to your RollApp token address, it's a translation. There's a function there that translates, for example, Dime to your RollApp EVM. It's important to note that to translate these tokens, you will need to use the correct or the same coin type. To make that simpler, to say is that if you use EVM RollApp, you're going to be able to translate the Dime addresses very easily. If you use, for example, Cosmwasm or a different VM, which can use, for example, coin type 118, and this is, for example, what Celestia uses, and other Cosmos chains, then you need to have people claim the ownership of their address, prove ownership, and then actually submit the RollApp EVM airdrop to another address. So what I mean to say is, like, it's very simple when you have EVM addresses, or for example, including Dime stakers, but it gets more cumbersome and more intensive when you actually want to airdrop to other coin types, for example, Celestia, Cosmos, Solana, and others.
Awesome. Thank you to Jamari for the question. Hopefully that helps as well. And thank you, Barry, for the explanation. I can't see any other questions. I think that is it. If anything pops up afterwards, feel free to direct them into the server and we can get them answered for you. But otherwise, Barry, once again, is there anything else to share from your end? Otherwise, we can wrap things up there.
No, that's pretty much it. I don't know if my dog was making noises in the background running around, but
no.
I have a little puppy that's running around everywhere, making chaos.
Well, very well behaved puppy, because I don't know about everyone else, but I was clueless and no barking or anything was coming through, so all is good. Adrian in the chat. But yeah, thank you, Barry, for an incredible session. As I said, it will be recorded, so hopefully that helps all of you with your projects and everything you're building. So yeah, thank you to Barry, especially with all the distractions in the background and a puppy running around. But otherwise, to everyone else, enjoy your weekends. Reach out if you need any assistance, and we'll see you all again on Monday for the next workshop. So yeah, thank you for coming along. Thank you, Barry, and we'll see you all again soon.
All right, see you guys.
Cheers. Bye-bye.